Under surveillance, Chinese-made cranes on American ports are coming under scrutiny. That's over fears they could be used for spying. But what information could Beijing get from them? And how does data on what Americans are moving in and out of ports relate to national security? Besides that, what if China shuts down the cranes remotely? Would we run into the same snarled supply chains that popped up during the pandemic? Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Chinese spy balloon has been shot down, but an even bigger danger might be quietly stationed on land: Chinese spy cranes. These giant Chinese-made cranes have dominated American ports for years, and U.S. officials fear China could be using them to gather intel on important American shipping data. Let's take a closer look.
Around 80% of the cranes in American ports were made in China. They're made by Chinese manufacturer ZPMC. These cranes are used to load and unload container ships. Pentagon officials compared these cranes to a Trojan horse because China may be able to track what America is moving in and out of the country with advanced sensors and cameras. Why does it matter, right, if China knows where the U.S. is moving in and out of the country? We talked to former White House intelligence official Michael Sikora. Sikora says China's strategy is to gather different pieces of data to put together a complete picture of what the U.S. is doing.
If you're tracking what hardware comes in, where it's going, you can see from a commercial sector what's going on. You can also see from a military perspective in terms of what units are there, what size they are, what sort of gear they're getting in for training, which then strongly indicates exactly what they're expecting to be deployed.
Aside from monitoring containers, for years people have wondered if China could control them remotely. Maritime historian Sal Mercogliano has been talking about this for over a year on his YouTube channel called What is Going On with Shipping. There's a definite concern here, according to him.
If the cranes were able to be disabled, turned off, or damaged in a way, it would have a catastrophic impact on the port. What we saw during the height of COVID, during the supply chain crisis, would be magnified at ports around the United States because you would not be able to effectively move containers on and off the vessels.
A logistics expert, Ross Kennedy, who's worked with ships and ports for 20 years, told us that China could have a better idea of how to hurt America with the data it collects.
If you take data that's coming off these ZPMC cranes, what you then begin to be able to do is really quantify the health of the entire economy of the United States by knowing what we're truly shipping and what we're not shipping, what we're importing and not importing. When you overlay that with all the other data that's available to someone who's an economic planner or supply chain analyst, they can begin to get a very clear picture of what we're strong in and what we're weak in economically.
Now, to put it simply, these cranes could track what's going in and out of the country. China could shut down all the cranes, and China could even control the cranes remotely. What can be done? Kennedy argues we should just get rid of them.
The simplest and most straightforward way to go about it is for the U.S. government to subsidize those ports authorities to rip the ZPMCs out all the way, send them to the scrapyard, or put them on a ship back to China and say, here, we don't want your cranes anymore, and install cranes that are manufactured by companies and countries that are definitely integrated with the U.S.'s national security interests.
Former White House intelligence official Michael Sikora believes this is a complex problem and that we need a complex solution to solve it.
We're not going to solve it with one technology, one solution, one whatever. So it took time to put it in place. It's going to take time to take it out of place. And to do that, we have to do it in a way that our resources are utilized in the most effective way to minimize the risk as much as possible at each step.
Apple is shifting more of its production out of China as the tech giant works to diversify its supply chain, and it might happen faster than anticipated. Apple's manufacturing partner Foxconn plans to build a $700 million plant in India. That's according to Bloomberg News. The plant will be one of Foxconn's biggest yet in the country. State officials add the factory would generate around 100,000 jobs in the next 10 years. Bloomberg analysts explain that for Foxconn, the plan may, quote, herald an accelerated relocation from China. Beijing's strict virus restrictions disrupted the making of new iPhones and other devices there. Apple also hopes to avoid a hit to its business amid growing tensions between Washington and Beijing. Besides Apple, other tech companies are joining the shift. Last month, AirPods maker Gore-Tex announced a $280 billion investment in a new plant in Vietnam. The company also revealed it's considering other expansion in India. It's not just tech giants leaving China either. The country is no longer the top 3 investment destination for most U.S. firms. This, according to a recent survey by the American Chamber of Commerce in China. It marks a first for the entire 25-year history of the survey. Here's more.
More than 50% of businesses in China are not making a profit, also a first for the survey. Almost a quarter are looking for locations other than China. Businesses want to de-risk their supply chain. Most members report that they are revising their investment plans for China. Some are decreasing investment and some are stopping investment altogether. Top reasons for decreasing investment is uncertainty around China's policy environment, as well as the expectation of slower economic growth in China and overall uncertainty in the U.S.-China economic relationship. 24% of members are considering moving capacity out of China.
E.l.f. Cosmetics is leaving the Chinese market. The U.S.-based beauty brand says its departure is coming March 31st, and that its flagship store, based on e-shopping site Tmall and social media app Douyin, will shutter 2 weeks before that on March 15th. The shop opened in 2018. The company cited global strategy adjustments and other objective factors in a notice on its Tmall page. As part of an online clearance sale, around 30 products were still available to buy through its Tmall and Douyin shop when the news broke. All of them priced at a discount. Other products sold out quickly. Nearly all E.l.f. products are still made in China. The move follows in the footsteps of several other beauty brands, U.S.-based Revlon and Too Faced, owned by Estee Lauder, plus Dubai-based Huda Beauty. Revlon announced the shutdown of its Tmall store in mid-March. Huda shut down its own last month, and Too Faced did the same last July. Beijing still blocking U.S. probes into the origin of COVID-19. That's according to 2 Congress members, Connecticut Democrat Jim Himes and Ohio Republican Mike Turner. Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Congressman Himes explained the U.S. has so few facts about the virus origin, quote, because the Chinese regime has obfuscated.
It may be forever before we actually know exactly what happened. We need the Chinese to cooperate. Don't we need?
Himes is the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Controversy over the virus origin rocketed back into the spotlight last month. That's after classified documents from the Energy Department to the White House got leaked. It allegedly labeled the Wuhan lab leak theory as the most likely source of the pandemic. The department has not made an official comment. Debate still surrounds the virus origin issue, and lawmakers, officials, and federal agencies have voiced various opinions. From FBI Director Christopher Wray's saying the initial outbreak was likely a lab incident in Wuhan, to the Office of the National Intelligence Director stating it was most likely caused by national exposure to an infected animal. The Chinese regime denies the possibility of a lab leak. The United States should work to quickly end the Ukraine war so it can focus on its main global threat, the Chinese Communist Party. That's what Keith Kellogg, a retired Army general and the former National Security Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, said in a recent interview. Speaking to Yania Kellogg, host of American Thought Leaders, Kellogg said the U.S. military should fight only one enemy at a time. Here's his breakdown.
When you look at what happened in this administration, in their national security policy, they don't call anybody an adversary. They don't call the Russians an adversary. They don't call the Chinese an adversary. They call them competitors. Look, France is a competitor. China is an adversary, and we need to look at it.
He said until the U.S. takes the Russians off the stage, it can't focus on the predominant threat, China. Kellogg emphasized that the United States should do everything it can to help Ukraine stand up against the Russian army and negotiate with Russia's leadership.
I would give Putin a choice. And if I was the President of the United States, you pick up the phone, which President Biden has not done. You pick up the phone and call Putin and say, you got an option. We're going to negotiate. And because there's been no negotiations, and we should, you're going to lose your army in Ukraine, or you're going to take it home. One of the two. It's going to be your choice.
Meanwhile, China says it's decided not to deliver weapons to Russia. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated, "We must observe it every day." Arlene Richards, NTD News.
The Canadian government will investigate allegations of Chinese election interference. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement on Monday. Here's what he said.
In the coming days, we will appoint an eminent Canadian to the position of independent special rapporteur, who will have a wide mandate to make expert recommendations on protecting and enhancing Canadians' faith in our democracy.
Apart from an independent special rapporteur, there will also be separate new probes into the suspected foreign interference. Canadian media recently published detailed reports alleging schemes by the Chinese regime to interfere in Canada's election in 2021 and 2019. The report cited anonymous intelligence sources.
Last month, a former Canadian ambassador to China testified at a hearing before Canadian Congress. During his speech, Charles Burton said the Chinese Communist Party had used Chinese language media in Canada to intervene in Canada's 2021 federal election. In September of that year, then popular Conservative Member of Parliament Kenny Chiu lost his seat. But Burton believes Chiu might still be in office if it weren't for a Beijing disinformation campaign.
I think what happened in the case of Mr. Chiu was that on the same day as there was a poll that came out that showed that the Conservatives might achieve a minority government, then this massive campaign of disinformation on multiple Chinese language websites directed at people in Canada appeared.
Chiu voted to declare China's treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang region as genocide. And in Europe, Germany is planning to ban Chinese telecom gear companies Huawei and ZTE from its 5G networks. The ban could include components already built into the networks. Let's zoom in on Berlin's plan.
Germany is in the midst of a broad reevaluation of its relationship with top trade partner China. This includes eliminating security risks posed by the Chinese companies Huawei and ZTE. Critics say their embedding in the mobile networks of the future could give Chinese spies and even saboteurs access to vast swaths of critical infrastructure. Germany passed an IT security law in 2021. It sets high hurdles for manufacturers of telecom equipment for next-generation networks. However, it does not ban Huawei and ZTE, as some other countries have already done. A new report shows that Germany has become even more dependent on Huawei for its 5G radio access network equipment than in its 4G network.
Chinese-owned social media app TikTok is also facing more scrutiny in Europe. The French Senate has launched an investigation into the app, looking into security risks connected with it, as well as the possibility of it causing psychological harm to its largely young audience. Amid a widespread fiscal crisis, Beijing is calling on local officials to tighten their belts. That, as a budget deficit of more than $800 billion, dims the outlook for 2023. Let's take a closer look.
In the run-up to China's parliamentary sessions, Finance Minister Liu Kun reported on the country's public budget overdraft last year. The figure, a staggering 6 trillion yuan, or more than $860 billion. To lower debt levels, Liu urged local authorities to cut the cost of administrative operations. But where did the big bucks end up? An Epoch Times columnist says they went towards footing the bill for the CCP's 3-year zero COVID-19 policy.
Many cities, for example, scrambled to build temporary COVID-19 hospitals, though they have all been torn down by now. And the communists forced citizens into mass COVID-19 testing, which was also a hefty expense.
Estimates suggest that in 2022, the Chinese regime spent more than $50 billion on anti-COVID-19 measures. The figure reached up to 3% of the country's GDP for that year. In the capital city of Beijing alone, health spending totaled $4.5 billion, up 140% from 2020. To fill the gap, news broke that local governments are cutting civil service salaries. Meanwhile, protests have recently spread across several cities as retirees railed against slashes to their healthcare benefits.
Last year, the regime diverted funds from urban health insurance for COVID-19 testing. It wants an excuse to spend this money. That's why it's now staging health insurance reforms and cutting benefits for recipients.
An even worse scenario kicked off last July. Residents in some regions reported cases of frozen bank accounts that left their deposits in limbo.
好多人在排队，都是因为银行卡被冻结的。
就在昨天啊，我的银行卡突然间里面有余额，但是不能正常支付了。
Whenever there is a fiscal deficit, the CCP will first deny it. Then it sneaks around the problem by diverting money from elsewhere, not only the health insurance fund, but also residents' savings in the bank. That's why many people can't access their deposits.
Though it wasn't just COVID-19 curbs that drained Beijing's coffers. Wu added that other factors include China's shrinking real estate market and its pricey Belt and Road Initiative.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what's coming up in our second half. Is the U.S. at war with China? With Confucius Institute spreading Beijing's propaganda on American campuses, Chinese police stations popping up on U.S. soil, and agencies keeping ties to Beijing's influence operations, we speak to John Mills, former director of cybersecurity policy at the Pentagon, for insight. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epoch TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.